it was a bit of like a woe is me moment. Because I was like, shit, like I busted my ass for this company and I wasn't demoted in any way, but to have somebody hired above me when I couldn't be part of the decision-making process. I was on the senior leadership team at the time, so I wasn't part of the decision-making process. I have to say that was a low point because it felt so out of my control.
Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Andrew Kaplan, and this is a show where I get to chat with my SaaS heroes, people who I look up to hear about their journeys, see how they got here, and double click on some of the toughest moments that they've encountered in their career along the way. My guest today is incredible. Someone you probably know of and look up to if you're anything like me. It's Georgiana Laudi. Gia, as she goes by, is the co-founder of Forget the Funnel. And she's a badass. She's been working with high growth B2B SaaS companies since 2010. It's all companies you know of and look up to. Unbounce, Sprout Social, Bitly, AppQ, SparkToro, Invoice Simple, and a few others. And we talked about how growing up in a family with a mother who's an artist and a father who's an entrepreneur influenced Gia becoming an entrepreneur and getting into marketing. We talked about what she would do differently if she could go back in time early in her career. We talked about the toughest moment that she had to navigate when she was in-house on parental leave. We talked about really tough feedback that she's received, and we explored how she navigates giving tough feedback. We covered a ton of ground in this episode. I think you're going to love it. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So here's where I want to start. I want to start with a really tough question, which is, how do you describe what you do today at Forget the Funnel for your family during the holidays?
Sometimes I just say marketing, even though that's really nothing of what I do anymore. But most times what I do is just, I say I help tech companies grow. Because really any more nuance or detail than that is just really doesn't matter at the end of the day. They don't actually really care. They want to know, are you happy? Is everything good? They don't care about the details. They are so far outside of this world that there's really no point. Otherwise, I just say I do marketing and people are like, cool, we know what marketing is.
This has become my favorite question because most people's answers are really long, where they're like, well, there's like this thing, and then like I do this thing, and it's kind of similar, and it's sort of like consulting, but in this one area, and nobody has a quick, succinct answer.
Nope, that's all. That's it.
So what I'd really like to do now is let's go back in time and talk about how you got here. So can you take us back and tell us, like, where are you from? What was your childhood look like? Or what did your childhood look like? Excuse me.
Oh, holy. So I grew up in Montreal. So I'm Canadian, and just very typical suburbia. Nothing really extraordinary there. My father is an entrepreneur, and my mother was a graphic artist. My father is nearing 80, still works full time, still running his business. My mother, graphic artist, she had 2 art degrees, like fine arts and something else. She was a real, like you can just imagine, like real hippie. She led the graphic arts department pre-digital at the college across the street from my high school. And so I visited her at work a lot. So she was very much the artist and my father was very much the business side of things. They divorced when I was relatively young, but even then, so I was about 8 at the time, even then I sort of was like, okay, business, art, I'm going to end up being influenced by this. I don't know how yet. I actually, when I was a kid, I thought I was going to be an agent for artists. I thought I was going to help artists who were like, didn't have business savvy, didn't know how to sell themselves. I thought that's what I was going to do, was I was going to advocate on behalf of artists and help them sell their work. But it's absolutely not where I ended up at all. But that was how I drew those connections between like artistry and entrepreneurship somehow.
And what did your dad do? So you mentioned that your mom was into art, and your dad was an entrepreneur, but like what kinds of stuff was he into?
Retail. So he's had a retail shop, large retail florist. Since, what year was that? The year my brother was born. So like mid 70s, he had launched this before I was born. And later in life, when I was working for him, that was out of university. That was one of my first like real jobs. Is I decided to work for him. I had a couple of other jobs before that doing like silly stuff while I was part-time in school. But at the time, Flowers, this is very early 2000s. Yeah, very, very early 2000s. Flowers were, and I don't know what this numbers are on this today, but they were the fourth most purchased thing on the internet behind porn and books, I want to say. And I don't remember what number 3 was, but flowers were there. Really, really competitive. Like SEO was like the whole thing. And so I learned SEO as the first sort of foray into this. I studied communications at university, so I also built like a website, and it was an e-commerce website. So that was a whole thing too. And I was doing what I didn't know was conversion rate optimization. Social media launched like, a couple of years in. And so I was doing some of that. So really it was like digital marketing that I was doing for this business while also being physically in a brick and mortar space. So that was my that was his business, and I got pulled into there. I was there for 8 years. That was my first career.
And how did you learn how to do all that stuff? Right. So in the early 2000s, there wasn't the same kind of online courses. In college, they didn't have classes on this stuff. How'd you learn to figure out what to do?
It's funny. I was thinking about this recently. There was this guy, Perry Marshall. That guy's name has not come across my brain in years. But there was this guy, there were online thought leaders, not like we know today, but there were people teaching internet marketing in the early 2000s. They were mostly focused on SEO and paid, and about how to launch e-commerce websites in really niche markets. So wedding favors, or I remember the e-commerce website that I was going to launch that I did not launch because of logistical reasons, which is going to sound really obvious in a second, was a martini glass, unique martini glasses. And I got in touch with drop shippers, and it was going to be my niche. It was going to be my claim to fame. And I was going to launch this website, and I ultimately didn't do it because no drop shipper would talk to me. They were like, martini glasses, are you serious? We're not, you'll never, they're too breakable. So I ended up not launching it. But there were all to say that there were sort of influencers in the space at the time. So I was just reading a lot of newsletters and blogs on the topic, and Googling around, and also just trial and error, obviously.
And you had a family business where you had a long leash and trust. And so it's kind of the best situation, right? You've got access to some information, an environment where you can try stuff, fail, see what actually works, what doesn't work. It's sort of the perfect storm.
Yeah, 100%. And the business had been around for years, and there was I had a lot of sort of traffic to sort of leverage, because the brand name was, still is well known, and they have a good reputation. So it was the perfect environment to learn, for sure.
And so you mentioned the martini business. Were you always entrepreneurial? Did you have other businesses when you were in high school? Did you have other stuff you were into?
I didn't really. I don't have that quintessential story. But I did always know that I was going to be an entrepreneur. But I definitely felt as though I had to earn it first. I needed to get practical experience before that. I mentioned the martini website. I'm failing to remember at this moment. This is eons ago. Failing to remember if I ever did launch any one of those websites. And I don't think I ever did. I think I just, again, continued to leverage what I had available to me. And eventually what happened was I started to feel ready when there was an industry magazine that reached out to us and interviewed the family because of what we were able to do online. And we became number 1 in the city, and we were in the burbs. Our shop is in the burbs. And we became number 1 in the city because there was somebody dedicated to marketing, and that wasn't typical. Brick and mortar businesses like that, small businesses, they don't have somebody learning digital marketing. So it was a big advantage to the business. And so we ended up getting interviewed because of that. And they were really interested in what I'd done. And then eventually that magazine started asking me to write a regular column. So I started writing a column, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, here I am teaching other people how to do digital marketing. I don't even know how old I was at the time, easily in maybe mid-20s, early 20s. And eventually what happened was I joined Twitter, and then Twitter kind of changed everything because I got exposed to the tech community. I also had a short stint at an advertising agency where I did much of the same. And anyway, that all kind of got me primed for this, like, I can do this now. I feel like I've got enough experience. I feel like I've got some sellable skills. And so I forayed into, so to speak, freelancing really for a couple of years. And then as a typical entrepreneur would, I overworked and took on way, way too much. And it was bananas. Like, I had more work than I could handle. When young, childless, single, not a big issue, but at the same time, I was like, ooh, this is probably not sustainable. And I started to feel like I was not loving it as much. And then I went back in-house. I went in-house at Unbounce and moved across the country to join the team. And that was like that was like a completely different phase of life. But I would say that the entrepreneurship, like, sort of bug has always been there. I've just kind of like forayed a little bit, then come back out and gone back in and come back out. But now I'm in it. There's no going back.
Love that. Yeah. I was just going to ask if you see yourself going back in it, but you already answered it.
Definitely not.
Once you get a taste of no boss, who wants a boss?
Well, there's more bosses. With entrepreneurship, there's more bosses, but you get to choose your bosses, right?
100%. And you can fire your boss, right? You have the ultimate control.
That's right. Yeah.
So you mentioned Unbounce. Your background is very impressive, right? For someone looking at you and your background, you worked your way up to VP of marketing at Unbounce. Now you're an advisor for dozens of companies, Sprout Social, SparkToro, Marketer Hire, Bitly, DBT Labs. There's a whole bunch of others on your LinkedIn profile. I'm curious to know about a mistake or challenging moment early in your career.
It's funny that you say my track record is impressive. That's like one of the things I'm like, oh, my track record's not actually that good. It's so strange, hey, how we have this weird perspective on our own.
Does anybody feel like they have a good track record? Because if you don't have a good track record, who does? Like, I bet if you looked at your resume and it had a different name on the top, you'd be like, wow, that's a badass.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe I should try that exercise every once in a while. Obviously, I don't really like to think in these terms because I don't like to have regrets. And I think that everything happens for a reason. But one thing that definitely stands out when I was in-house that I wish I hadn't done was I forgot about the long picture, the longer sort of story of what my career was going to be after I left in-house. Because when I was in it, I was only in it. Like, all I had capacity, like mental capacity for, was the work that I was doing. I was hell-bent on, over-delivering. And even in-house, I work like a business owner. I treat the thing like it's my own. And so that's what I was doing and I was in-house for 5 years. And so during that time, anytime anybody came to me to ask to interview me or ask to have me speak at their conference or event or whatever, I said no all the time because I was like, who's got time for that? I don't have time to speak at conferences. I'm way too busy over here. I say those words now and it's almost laughable because I think that some folks in-house would not make that same mistake and recognize that, like, I'm not going to be at this company forever. There is a career me after I leave this company. And so they wouldn't be that short-sighted, but I was quite short-sighted and I turned away a lot of opportunity when I was in-house. I also disappeared off all of social media again, because I was like, that's a luxury I can't afford. I'm too busy over here building. So, I mean, I understand my logic, but at the same time, I wish I hadn't done that. Because then when I left in-house, I was like, oh shit, here I am starting from scratch, which I know isn't true, but it definitely felt that way.
I'm laughing because I did that and I got bad advice. I remember having a conversation when I was, director of growth at Wistia. I reported to the COO, who was someone who I looked up to, who really mentored and pushed me and believed in me. And I started to get invited to a small number of things like that. And I was like, who has time to do the work and also be in front of the room talking about the work? It's a totally different skill set. They're both kind of a full-time thing. And he used this analogy. He was like, look, you can be a show horse or you can be a workhorse, and you kind of can't do both and you have to choose. And little me was like, I'll be a workhorse. I could always be a show horse later. And like, that was backwards. Probably we should have been building that muscle as we learned things. And so it's funny. That's one of my regrets too. How might things have been different if you hadn't said no to all those opportunities along the way?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, maybe not at all, but I think I probably would have gotten to exercise those muscles a little bit more, because exactly the same. The show horse was like, no, that felt like, again, like a luxury that I wasn't that interested in. I was just really interested in making an impact. And I thought that the way to do that was to be a workhorse, right? So leaving, I mean, had I taken advantage of some of those opportunities, leaving, I probably would have felt better set up. I would have probably had more connections in that space. Not that I was, not that I suffered in that way at all, but I definitely did not build up that skill set until much later than I should have. Certainly could have, but definitely should have.
And what would be your advice to someone who's listening to this, who's a senior doer? They're starting to wonder about their personal brand and how to de-risk their future and all kinds of those questions in their mind. And they're wondering, how do I take the first step in this direction? Right? Because you're on the other side of it now. What would be your advice to someone in that situation?
I would say start writing. Probably because, writing is a great exercise. By the way, I am not the example for this. I have done enough writing to know how powerful it can be. I definitely do not consider myself a writer. I am a painfully slow writer.
Well, you have published a book, just to pump you up a little bit.
This is true. And I often I don't equate the two somehow, because what I'm really talking about is like exercise your ideas on paper, so to speak, is what I would do prior to getting on a stage. Because you have to know how you think. You have to know what your opinion is. And one of the best ways to do that is to put it out into, take a low stakes stab at it, basically, and put it out into the world and start collecting feedback and what people think and get, people's candid feedback or just, thoughts or comments, or getting that your ideas out there and having that feedback loop in place will help you feel more confident to appear on more podcasts or, appear on stages and things like that. So anybody starting out that hasn't done any of it, I would definitely say start with writing. Way back, it was like start blogging, but now it's just like, start posting to social media, like long form, like actually get into the nitty gritty of how you, your opinion on things and your thoughts on things and how you do things, and start collecting feedback. And I think you'll start to feel more confident that your ideas will resonate once you do start, being even more public or taking bigger sort of risks, I should say.
And what about the person listening to this who says, hey, easy for you to say you worked at Unbounce, you advised all these impressive companies, you run your own business now. I'm just little old me. And I work at some random Series A company that nobody's ever heard of. And I'm scared to put something out there because if nobody sees it and nobody reacts to it, it's going to make me feel smaller, not bigger.
That happens to everyone. That is everyone's reality right now. Except for the people who are really dedicated. I don't know, Andrew, how you treat marketing yourself, or how many hours a day or a week you dedicate to marketing. But I would say anybody who's even somewhat inconsistent with it, me, super inconsistent with it. We're not marketing has always been our weak spot. Shoemaker shoes. But as soon as you're inconsistent, you could crickets are a real thing no matter what your situation is. You could hit or you could fall. Basically in any situation. So I don't think experience is necessarily the thing. Also, build up your network and focus on providing value, see who's just a tiny bit behind you in their learning curve on something. You can provide a ton of value to them. There's always somebody there's always going to be a gajillion people ahead of you. And there's always going to be some people behind you as well. Provide some value and, you'll start to learn. It'll start to self-perpetuate. Everybody's got some value to provide. I think that's a cop-out, to be honest.
What's a cop-out?
To say, I'm too early to teach. I'm too early to provide any value. There's always going to be somebody behind you. There will always be, value that you can provide to somebody. So don't sell yourself short, basically. It's
a self-limiting belief to believe
That's
that,
right.
To think that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Understood. So you talked a little bit about turning away some opportunities that could have unlocked more network and more long-term opportunities. Is that the only low point in your journey?
It's been long. So there's been many. I don't know. If I think back to in-house days, I was in-house for 5 years. So a lot happens in 5 years. So 5 years is a lengthy tenure these days. And so a lot happens over that time. Most of it was absolutely fantastic, and I learned a ton. I mean, even the low points, obviously, the learnings are huge. I guess the only reason why I would consider this a low point is because I really did feel like it was out of my control, and I didn't actually learn a ton. Because low points where I learn a ton, I don't think of as low points. I think of as like I needed that, and it served its purpose. But this one particular scenario, which was just unfortunate, so I'm Canadian. And when I had my first child, I was on maternity leave, and we have a pretty lengthy maternity leave in Canada. I mean, you wouldn't even, it's too long. It's too long.
How long is it? I have a 3-month-old, so I just got back from a very short maternity leave.
You do not want to know how long it is. So where we are, we have the option to take 18 months, either parent, it can be shared. And now, depending on your career, an 18-month lapse in your career is huge, right? There was no way I was taking 18 months. By the way, when I took my maternity leave, it wasn't 18 months. It's 18 months now. It's 12, and it's paid.
That's beautiful for what it's worth. I think that's great.
It is. However, that is a really tough call. When you're in a senior position in-house in an industry like tech, it is a real battle. And I had a really, really hard time with like, all right, I knew I wasn't going to take the full 12, and I didn't. I ended up taking 6. And like, I swear I'll go to the grave with like, was that the right choice? Like, I'll never know if that was the right choice or not. At the end of the day, what ultimately that did, the impact that had was while I was away, the company that I was working for acquired another smaller product. And in that, like, acqui-hire, sort of like in that acquisition, they brought in somebody above me. And I remember the conversation that I had with my CEO because he called me to tell me while I was on maternity leave. And it was, I don't want to say heartbreaking, because I understood why. It just felt unfair. It was a bit of like a woe is me moment. Because I was like, shit, like I busted my ass for this company. I killed myself to really have a massive impact. And I wasn't demoted in any way, but to have somebody hired above me when I couldn't be part of the decision-making process. I was on the senior leadership team at the time, so I wasn't part of the decision-making process. I have to say that was a low point because it felt so out of my control. And it's not fair. It's not fair to like, put blame on the company or in the system or in me or in my kid or whatever. It was just unfortunate. And it will remain in my mind's eye as like a low point because it felt so out of my control. It was very unfortunate. And I've spoken to many women, in this field that work in tech who have found out that they're pregnant and they're like, good Lord, what do I do? Because it is a really, really tough transition, particularly if you have the option of taking this really lengthy maternity leave, which it's a tough decision. It's a tough transition to make as a professional, mother or father.
Can you take us to the moment? Like, how does that phone call even happen? Like, does your CEO send you a text? Hey, got a sec? You get an email to your personal Gmail? Like, how do you even get to that point? Do you remember?
Yeah, So I don't know. I think I was probably still at least somewhat checking my email, I suppose. And yeah, it was a phone call. And I mean, poor guy. He's like the nicest. He was fantastic. I loved my CEO, and we had a great relationship. And I know that he was in a tough spot, and I know that it was hard for him. I was really disappointed, but I got it. I tried not to let on that I was super disappointed because I was of that mind too, that I didn't want to make him feel bad. It was a tough situation all around. At the end of the day, it was fine. What kind of sucks about it is that ultimately that CMO ended up being fired not long after I left the company, which is really unfortunate. I was like, that was for nothing. But I mean, it is what it is. It's fine.
And so how is it when you first go back? Because it's probably awkward for both of you, right? So they hired the CMO. It's above you. They probably feel weird about it. You have your personal feelings about it. How was it like that first week back? Like, do you set up a one-on-one? Or are you kind of like frenemies? Or like, what's like the vibe?
Oh boy. I have not thought about this in a long time. This is years ago now. I mean, it was a bit awkward, but at the same time, I was like, cool, I'm going to learn something from this guy. I'm going to take advantage of this and soak up as much as I possibly can. It didn't end up quite working out that way. I was hopeful that it was going to work out that way. There was a couple of things at play. So anybody who has worked in person and then gone remote, or anybody who has worked in a hybrid situation will understand when I say that potentially part of what went wrong was that we were in a hybrid situation. We went to like in person. We opened up an office in Montreal. So the head office is Vancouver. We opened up an office in Montreal. We had a little satellite office there. And so being on the senior leadership team, but being the only member of the senior leadership team on the other side of the country made it extra hard. And so there were a lot of rooms that I ended up not being in ultimately. And I mean like physical rooms. So that was working against us a little bit, and that made it harder. It's not to say that I didn't learn anything. I definitely did. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the team. The team expanded, dramatically during that time. It was an interesting time of growth for the company. I was hoping to leverage having the goal was for me to learn a ton from him. That was the whole premise. Like, you're going to learn a ton. It's going to be great for you. And ultimately, that is not what ended up happening. But I still learned a ton in the process. I learned a ton about personalities and control and power and like superficial power struggles. And it was an interesting time. The company kind of exploded in employees during that time. So it was a lot going on. I'm not only referring to this one person. There was just a lot happening at that time. And that was the learning experience. Unfortunately, it wasn't on the like leadership, marketing leadership side of things that I learned. I learned more on the growing pains of expanding a team very quickly and a company very quickly. That was what that learning experience ultimately ended up being, which was great.
If you could go back in time, excluding the amount of time that you took for leave, is there anything that you would do differently in the way that you handled that situation or navigated it?
To be honest, no. No, I don't think so. I don't think I could have done anything more beyond what I did. I think it was good. Like, ultimately, we were very successful. It was a very successful experience overall. Was it painstaking for me to be away from my team and feel like I was letting them down in some way, or like handing them to somebody else? Like, I was still very much, involved and in a leadership position and had regular touch points with them. But I think the dynamic of that, like, we did the best we could with like a bunch of variables happening, quickly growing, expanding team. The company, we moved offices twice because of the quickly growing team. Like, we had to change physical locations twice in both offices. The levels of leadership sort of changing, new C-suite coming in and going out, VPs coming in and going out. Like, there was a lot going on, and I think we did great at the end of the day. So no, I wouldn't change anything.
I love this answer, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there who either are going through a leadership change or were hoping to get a promotion. Instead, the company hires someone above them, and they always feel like, I should have done something different. I coulda, shoulda, woulda. It must have been me. And so I love that you said, no, there's nothing I would have done differently. I did the best that I could given the situation, because that's probably the best advice. The best you can do is the best you can do. This episode is brought to you by Novatic. We're seeing the next phase of product-led growth emerge right now. The first phase of PLG was all about using your product as a go-to-market tool. Basically creating free plans, free trials, or reverse free trials, getting new accounts to sign up, and then layering in retention and upgrade programs. It was a solid playbook. The only challenge is that the product value is hidden behind your sign-up form, which means that most of your visitors never get to see it. The next phase of PLG is all about leading with product value, creating interactive product demos, embedding them on your website, and letting people play with them, click around, and see the value before signing up. This engages way more people, which means more experience that value, more convert to your paid plans, and more become brand advocates. If you're sold on the idea, but not sure where to start, check out Novatic. Their no-code editor makes it easy to create interactive demos, and they're offering a free trial exclusively for delivering value listeners. Go to novatic.com/value and sign up for a free trial and see for yourself. This episode is presented by AppQues. If you work in product-led growth, you know how important activating and engaging new accounts is. Turning new accounts into active users is critical to your success in a PLG environment, and typically why activated accounts is a North Star metric for growth teams. It's why my team spent years focused on improving our new user onboarding experience during my time at Wistia and at Postscript. And that's why I'm so excited that AppQues is sponsoring the show. They're just as passionate about helping product-led companies fix their onboarding and their retention as I am. They're the leading product onboarding and adoption platform for web and mobile apps, and they've helped over 1,500 SaaS orgs create exceptional onboarding experiences that convert new users into power users and brand advocates. So if you're looking for help activating more new accounts, head to appqs.com/value. They have a free new user onboarding audit, which is done by Ramli John. He literally wrote the book on new user onboarding, and he's a close personal friend of mine. For help, head to appqs.com/value.
It's a little bit of an anomaly situation because it's not like I was there and this person was hired above me. It was like they acquired a company. I was away. They needed leadership, so they bought this person in. So at first, it felt like a bit of a gut punch. But then I was like, no, they're doing what they got to do. And I need to respect that that's what they're doing, what they need to do. And I didn't take it personally because I understood the circumstances. Like I could let go of my Legos. I don't know if that reference sticks.
It's a famous Harvard Business Review article for anybody listening to this. Maybe we'll see if we can drum it up for the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the right thing. I think they made the right decision. Ultimately, the leadership, the individual wasn't the right fit, but I think it was for the time, me being away for 6 months. Like 6 months is an eternity at a tech startup. So much happens in that amount of time. So I totally understand why they made that decision, for sure.
Shifting gears a little bit, I'm curious to know if you're comfortable sharing some tough feedback that you've received, either formally in like a 360 review or informally from someone on your team or a peer or another member of the leadership team. What comes to mind?
I definitely have feedback that I recall receiving years ago when I was in-house, like 360 feedback. More recently. So we went through an exercise, I forget the funnel, with the team where we did 360 feedback. I'm trying to think if there's anything that stuck out in that feedback as sort of like gut wrenching. And I guess maybe it's the typical, like, more clarity on direction. I don't, not repeating the direction of the company a little bit, but that's just like, oh yeah, okay, good reminder. Thank you. As opposed to this like 360 feedback that I received a few years ago that surprised me, because I'm a pretty self-aware person, and this surprised me, and I was heartbroken a little bit because the feedback was that I was intimidating. And like, I know I can be an intense person. I am an intense person. And that's kind of like, that was kind of why I was there. I was there to be that intense activator, to get everybody excited, to move everybody in the same direction and be that like, that big personality. That was literally why I was hired for the job. So when I got that feedback, it shook me, but like it surprised me a little bit because I actually thought that I was doing the balancing act better than I probably was. And so getting that feedback, I was like, oh, okay. Like I started replaying one-on-ones and like replaying, team meetings where like, who knows? I started trying to figure out where I was going off and making people feel like they couldn't make mistakes under my leadership. That really sucked because I did not want anybody to ever feel like they couldn't mess up, because like I mess up all the time. Mess ups are totally fine. Like, make new mistakes. I'm into the make new mistakes thing. And so the fact that they didn't know that I had a tolerance for that was obviously a communication failure on my part, like 100%. This was my problem, not their problem. I took that one hard, but hopefully I was able to turn that one around. I never got the feedback again, so that's good.
Probably a good sign. What's interesting about that piece of feedback is I feel like I chat with a lot of folks who get some feedback on an unknown, right? Something that they weren't aware of that they were doing, and they get some feedback and it doesn't feel good, and then they fix it. But in this case, this piece of feedback was also kind of your superpower, right? Because you said, I was brought there to be this person. When I'm at my best, I'm filling in the gaps a little bit, but when I'm at my best, there's probably some parts of my personality that could be described that way. So what do you do when now you get this piece of feedback that's something that you like about yourself that's been helpful, but now is being used as kind of your kryptonite? Like, what do you do with that?
It's tough. I mean, this is my forever thing. Like, I get this feedback from my family. Like, I get it from my husband says, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. Like, it's not what you're asking or it's not the words coming out of your mouth, it's the delivery. And I'm certain that that is still a thing. And I think this will follow me for my life. But again, you're right. It was, well, this is why I'm here. Like, I'm here to push you. That is literally my role, is to push you to be your best. And like, yeah, I could stand to learn some more kid gloves. I think I've gotten better at it over time. I've definitely had to deliver, feedback and work with people to improve many, many, many times since. But I'm definitely, how I've tried to address it is like, I do provide a ton of context and try to over communicate that I am fine with mistakes, and that like, I'm here as a thought partner to you, leverage me how you see fit. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is your job and your thing. And I will be here to, figure it out with you if you get stuck. And I try to communicate that a lot. I try to over communicate that now. I probably didn't communicate that enough then, but yeah, it was tough because it wasn't a muscle that I had refined well enough. I probably still haven't refined it well enough, if I'm honest.
What about on the flip side? What is a time when you had to deliver some feedback that was hard for you to deliver?
I can't even begin. Like the amount of times I've had to give feedback. To be honest with you, nothing stands out in my memory as being like, I mean, letting people go, I suppose, is because giving feedback, I mean, I'm giving feedback. Every word that comes out of my mouth is feedback. Like, it's all feedback all the time. The people that I work with know exactly how I am feeling about everything. So I don't hold back because I don't like these build up moments of like, hey, we need to talk. Like, I don't want to ever be in that situation. I want everybody to know how I feel, and it's not a mystery. I try never to put myself in a position where I need to deliver tough feedback. Because it's always little pieces along the way. The only thing I guess that would stand out is when I literally have to let somebody go. To be honest, I can't even conjure up one example of having to deliver tough feedback.
And maybe let's take the example that you just shared. So going back in time, in your head, you don't have to say the person's name, obviously, but picture somebody who you had to let go from the team or the company. Do you rehearse that? Do you rehearse like what to say and how you want to deliver it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a lot of a thought partnership that I will do behind the scenes with like Claire to discuss, like what is real versus what is fact versus fiction, what just feels a certain way versus what are the real things that actually occurred. I definitely rely on thought partnership versus like rehearsing. I definitely rely on those around me for thought partnership on how to approach situations like that. Obviously, when you're letting somebody go, it's a really big deal. We try to be, like overly generous when we're in that situation. It's always an us problem. At the end of the day, it's not them. We're the problem, always. So the feedback that's provided or that conversation is really just like our own failure. And hopefully that, like, what we're always in that type of situation, you're trying to, redirect to a better fit and make the transition as easy as possible. And we try to be super, super generous, not only in like when we let people go, but also with like taking a lot of the blame, because that is the reality. If there's been a failure, it was a failure on our part. So we try to look at it that way for sure.
So to the person who's listening to this, who's a first-time manager, there's someone underperforming on their team. They know they probably need to let them go. They're losing sleep over it. They keep playing it over and over in their mind. They're already anxious about the conversation, even though it's not even on the calendar yet. What's something that that person should either think about or do to make it just a little bit smoother for them or a little easier on them?
I mean, I would definitely say make a plan. So start taking notes. Start keeping notes, because if you're trying to hold it in your head, you will turn it into a feeling versus like the fact versus fiction thing that I was talking about. If you have specific examples, that can be really, really helpful, and it takes your subjectivity out of it, which like you never want to have to rely on your own memory or your feelings about something. So always try to rely on actual facts. So I would be taking notes. The other thing is be very clear about what your role is in it. And probably that's where you start, is like, how did I fuck this up? Did I bring in the wrong person? Did I, give them the wrong set of responsibilities? Did I miss signs? Were there cries for help, so to speak, that I, didn't see? I would definitely be thinking about positioning it in that way, like where your failures are, instead of just looking at it like it's a them problem.
I have seen a pattern with newer leaders and newer managers that try to be like the cool manager, the friend manager, and they get a little too close to their team, which makes this extra hard, I think, in my opinion. Do you agree with that? And if so, do you keep a little more emotional distance between you and your team?
Oh, that's a good question. I definitely agree with that. Do I keep an emotional distance with my team? I have a very hard time with that at this point, because I'm not this is my company now. They're working for me. So I don't want to have an emotional distance from my team. But like I said, I generally am pretty transparent with how I'm feeling. So anything that is coming, or, any sort of signs, like I want a lot of communication. And I'm doing a lot of asking, like, how are you feeling? How's your, I don't use the word work-life balance, but like, how are you managing your time? Like definitely trying to get a sense of how they're feeling always, so that there's no surprises. And I know what to expect and they know what to expect. And I like I said, I'm very transparent with how I'm feeling. So they generally always kind of know how I feel about stuff. I don't hold like, hey, so it's feedback time. Like I don't tend to do that at all. It's much more organic, which can make it harder, right? If it's organic, but I have a very hard time. I'm not their friend. like that's not, I'm not in that situation. It's a different dynamic than being like a manager inside of a company where, like, I don't know, you might be younger than them. Like I've managed people that were older than me. So like that's a different dynamic versus people who are like, you literally see them as peers, but you just may be their manager, or maybe people that are earlier in their career, where you might be, more their friend. I mean, it's the same thing with parenting. I don't know if you've experienced this, but like, are you their parent or are you their friend? I am definitely at the point where I am their, I don't use the word boss, but like, there's no mistaking our org structure when you're the CEO, when you're like the owner of the company. So while I'd love to know them personally, and I love to keep communication lines open, and I love to talk about, personal stuff as much as work stuff, there's no like, oh, this person's my friend that I, where doing what's right for the business wouldn't happen. But like I said, I try as much as possible to never get into a situation where it would ever be a surprise to them if they were going to transition out or change roles or whatever. I don't know if I 100% answered your question.
No, I think so.
Hopefully.
I think it's, as a business owner, I agree. I think it's easier when it's your business. The org structure is clearer, and I think it's different when it's yours. Yeah. But where I personally struggled, and where I see folks struggle in my mentoring and coaching practice, is especially for folks who get promoted from within. So you go from being a badass IC to now all of a sudden managing some of the people who are literally your friends, right? They're the people that you're going out with and like whining about work with on Thursday nights. They're the people you're slacking, like kind of back channeling combos with. And now all of a sudden you're the boss. And so that transition I found to be really difficult because now all of a sudden you have to give them feedback. You're in charge of how much of a raise they get. You're doing the 360 performance reviews and the dynamic between the two of you totally changes. So at Unbounce, you got promoted up through the ranks. Did any of that stuff happen with you?
No, because I was like the first hire. I'm the one who built out the entire team. So I was never in that situation, but I totally understand what you're saying. And I mean, actually, you know what? That's not true. I did have somebody that was on an adjacent team come under me. The scenario that you just described where like they were your peer and then all of a sudden they report into you, again, like transparency. If they are your friend and you tell them like, so I guess this is my role now, like this is literally my job description. You know it, I know it, you know, taking it at face value and not hiding it or trying to camouflage it behind niceties, but just like acknowledging that this exists and that this is your role and that every role has value. This just happens to be the role that you are playing. I think you can, it's very manageable. For a first-time manager to be in that position, holy moly, that's definitely tough for sure to make that shift. But again, like if they're your friend and like transparency and you acknowledge each other's roles in the company, they will understand. They will understand.
And is that what you did with the person who came under your purview? Some flavor of that?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, I can't really remember the details of that, but I don't recall it ever being an issue because I always try as much as possible to be very clear with like, look, this is not my mandate, but like, this is my mandate and this is your mandate. And like, this is what I'm trying to accomplish and I'm trying to help you accomplish this other thing. And so as long as it is clear, as long as roles are clear, that makes it a lot easier. The problem is that sometimes roles are not 100% clear, especially when things change quickly and people are just like rolling with the punches because they have to, because you're in this like chaotic environment. That's when things I think get the messiest. But having clearly defined roles and you know areas of responsibility and telling them that like, hey, I'm reporting up to this. Like I have a boss myself, and this is what this is my goal, and this is what I need to communicate. Help me do that. Help me help you do that. Then I think it all works out quite well.
Where did you learn most of these communication skills? I'm going to call them skills, right? The skill of transparency, the skill of saying the things that most people leave unsaid. Like, where does that come from? It seems like it's just natural for you.
Yeah, I was going to say my dad. My father is like an over communicator, I think. I mean, obviously, like I've read the books and stuff. Some of those things have stuck over the years. One of the tools that I really like, especially with new team members, are tools like Gallup Strength Finder. Motivation Code is actually a more recent one, which is really, really cool. Like it used to be like the Myers-Briggs, and then it was Strength Finder, which I absolutely love. And then this Motivation Code one is really, really cool too. It really helps me figure out, it kind of expedites what I would be able to do naturally, which is like figure out what does this individual need in terms of communication to this individual? What does this person need as a style of communication? It kind of expedites that process. I love those exercises. One of my favorite things that we ever did when I was in-house, we had a team of about, I want to say maybe 20 or 30. And we all ran Strength Finder. And it was really, really interesting. The most interesting part of it was when we got to sort of put it all on a spreadsheet and compare and see like the matrix of where the team's strengths were and weaknesses. As the a leader of that team, I was like, oh wow, I know where I need to do my hiring, or I see my own biases in hiring. And where we're really strong and not as strong, and whether or not that makes sense for the marketing department or not. That was a really, really useful exercise. It really helps you think about the individuals and how to craft your message to one individual.
On the Strengths Finder, do you remember I think there's 4, right? Do you remember 1 or 2 of them?
There's 34, and they're ranked in order, and typically it's like a top 5.
I thought it was top 4 for some reason that were like maybe things.
You might be thinking of Myers-Briggs. But so Strength Finder, So interesting. I got to do it again. It's been a couple of years. So I've done it maybe 3 times over the last decade or so. And they shift slightly over the years, but there's been some mainstay. My number one, I think across all 3 times that I've done it, my number one is strategic. And my number 2, or I'm not going to remember these, but like communication is high up there. Individualism. So that's my fascination with like, what does this one person need? That I think helps a ton in leadership and in people management for sure. Activator. That was my like, let's get to work. Let's be excited about this work. This is cool shit that we're doing. Like, you know, the getting people excited and amped up to do their best work is definitely something that motivates me a ton. And then command was another one, which I thought was very interesting when I first saw it. Like if I'm in a meeting and it feels like nobody's in charge, like it's not my meeting, but I feel like nobody's in charge. I will be like, okay, I'm going to take this thing over because like, I can't stand that. So when needed, command is another one too. So I can, sort of steer. I'm failing to remember the other ones just because it's been a while since I looked at it, but it's a really cool exercise, especially for teams.
An ex-girlfriend from early in my 20s, her dad gave me that book. That was like a thing. He was like, I think you should take this. And so I would like to take it again because it's been 15, 17 years since I took it, just to see. I know it would change, but just to see, that would be really cool. So you talked about some of your strengths and some of the things that are just innate to who you are. If you could go back in time, what is something that you wished you worked on sooner and why?
Like on my person or in business or
I asked it open-ended kind of on purpose to see what would come out, but a skill. It could be a leadership skill. It might be a communication skill. I mean, sure, it could be a tactical skill, but I feel like the things that are probably most applicable to you long-term are some of the softer things. So I was curious what might come to mind there.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure. Probably what's top of mind for me right now is I started this business because I love the work, right? We started Forget the Funnel because we were passionate about the work and doing the work, which is like, the classic, I think Claire likes to use this like candle maker sort of analogy, like what do candle makers know about like running a business? So it's kind of that, right? So we're very skilled at what we do for the companies we work with. Where I am pushing to learn more now is in like actual running of the business and the financial side of the business and the, team and scaling out the team and not to use the term resource management, but kind of, right? Like being able to read the market and anticipate the ebbs and flows and seasonality and in the different quarters of the year and things like that. So that's where when I take myself out of the work, the day-to-day work of working with teams, which is the stuff that I love to do, that's the part of me that I'm trying to build out more of. And there's tons and tons of ways to do that. But my favorite way to do that is with peers that are in the space that have businesses either like mine or ideally just ahead or even far ahead as inspiration and sort of guides to what is possible and how I want this business to look in 5, 10, 15 years. I'm trying to do a better job of longer term thinking about the business versus just the day-to-day stuff comes quite naturally to me at this point.
And what about goals for you at this stage of your career? I mean, you talked about wanting to pick up some additional skills here. Do you have any personal goals at this stage?
Personal goals. I think personal goals would probably be to have a better work-life balance, right? To be able to, spend the time in the business on the stuff that I'm providing the most amount of value instead of just where I'm needed. I've had times in my career where I've been better at that than others. Right now, because of a couple of things that are going on, I'm like more involved in the day-to-day. And now I'm focused on I think I'd like to get to a place where I'm like limiting the amount of hours that I work every week, probably even to lower than like a full-time. schedule just as a goal. Not because I don't want to work on the business, but because I want to stress test the business and give the team an opportunity to do what they do best and not serve as a crutch. And again, just provide value where I am best served to provide that value and not for the rest.
I love this answer. I just chatted with Wes Bush from Product Led, and I asked him this question, and he said, I want my business to survive the Thailand test. I was like, what's the Thailand test? He's like, well, I tried to go to Thailand before and literally everything broke and I had to be on calls in the middle of the night and the time changed and I was miserable and the business didn't do well. And he's like, I'd like to go back to Thailand and I just want to see, can I create systems that can live on without me? And that's kind of what I'm hearing you say as well. I want to create systems to pull me out of the business so I can work on it in the ways that you just described.
Yeah. Sounds like he read Clockwork recently.
Did they talk about Thailand or is that very similar?
Well, it's like the whole thing is like forced vacation. Like you should build the business in such a way where everybody in the company can take 4 weeks off and nothing breaks. So probably, I think I've read that book twice and it's like it's one of those every couple of years you need the reminder. But I totally understand what he's saying. And yeah, it's kind of that vibe. Exactly.
If you had 4 weeks off, where are you going?
Probably my cottage for the month. So that's what we have historically tried to do is like take the month of August off. I was not successful this year. Some years have been easier to do than others, but we do go down to either Hawaii or Mexico. We did Thailand for a month, but I'm not off. I'm working remotely from there generally. Obviously it's a lower like work schedule and definitely a different time zone. Hawaii, Hawaii is my like magic place.
I saw you post on LinkedIn. You posted a photo of the Starbucks with the story. I found the story and I was like, oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. It's a magical place.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing your journey and your story and some of the bumps along the way. For folks who are listening to this that want to connect with you or just want to learn more about Forget the Funnel, where should they go? How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah. Forgetthefunnel.com, obviously easy, but I try to be, as I mentioned earlier, I try to be active on LinkedIn. Sometimes I'm better than others, but yeah, LinkedIn probably, I kind of give up on Twitter, unfortunately, RIP. But yeah, otherwise it's Gia at forgetthefunnel.com. If anybody, wants to reach out direct with any questions, hit me up.
Gia, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the pod. I hope that you enjoyed the episode. If you did, the biggest gift that you could give me as a small business owner and as a content creator would be a review. You know the game. You can go on to Apple Podcasts. You can go on Spotify. Leave a review. That would help me service this content to other folks who are like you. Obviously, you should subscribe to the content if you really dug it. And if there's feedback that you have for me, folks you think I should chat with, stuff that you wish I would gloss over faster, whatever it is, I'm all ears. I work in growth. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I try to collect feedback and iterate quickly. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn at Andrew Kaplan or on Twitter at @akaplan. Otherwise, hope you enjoyed the episode and I'll see you next show.